Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Patty, and on behalf of DIA, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Clinical Trial Flexibility and Customization Needs that are required by Biotechs and Next Generation Therapies. This solution provider webinar is brought to you by DIA in cooperation with Catalyst Oncology, X4 Pharmaceuticals, and Metadata, a Dassault system company. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping notes. Questions and answers can be submitted at any time during the webinar. Please use the question and answer box located on the toolbar of your Zoom window. We will address all questions at the conclusion of the panel. Within a few days, you will receive a post-webinar email containing the presentation slides, a recording of today's webinar, and a link to complete an evaluation. Should you have any questions that are not addressed during today's webinar, you may submit them at the end of the evaluation. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in the following PowerPoint slides are those of the individual presenter and should not be attributed to DIA or any organization with which the presenters are employed or affiliated. Today's panelists include Carrie Melvin, Senior Vice President, Development Operations, X4 Pharmaceuticals, Andrew Supnick, Vice President, Oncology Drug Development, Catalyst Oncology, Susan Albert, Executive Director, Oncology Drug Development, Catalyst Oncology, and Ted Kirby, Senior Director, Product Marketing, a Metadata Dassault system company.
Okay. Thank you, Patty, for that kind introduction. My name is Ted Kirby, and I will be moderating today's session. I'll kick it off by asking Carrie. Carrie, could you tell us a bit about your experience in biotechs and what you're looking for in a service provider?
Great, sure, thank you, Ted. So I have had the privilege of working for both very large pharma companies and very small biotechs. So imagine the needs of each of those types of companies can vary quite widely. And what I look for in a service provider can vary depending on the needs of the organization. Obviously, the study design, the therapeutic area, and whatever indications we might be pursuing. Also looking for the expertise or the internal infrastructure that in a small biotech we just don't have. So for me, we're typically needing some of the expertise that we may or may not have internally from more of like a cross-functional team, if you will. And to be able to get some of that buy-in, we may not have the internal knowledge or skill set to be able to execute adequately on our trials. Depending on the therapeutic area or the indication, sometimes even the class of drugs, the landscape can be incredibly competitive and the trial design itself can be super complex. So that only further highlights the need for, to get additional expertise and buy-in and a partnership from the service provider. So for me, that's really almost the basis of what I'm looking for when I'm looking for a service provider, is a provider that's flexible, adaptable, sort of can almost pivot on a dime, because in biotech, we tend to sort of, move rapidly. So somebody who has strong knowledge and expertise in the area that we're looking to develop the drug in, and a provider who sort of operates in that partnership model, not in the old way of working where they tell them what to do and they do it. It's more of like, sort of challenging each other and sort of testing the boundaries of each other is truly what I'm looking for, because it really has to be that partnership, in my opinion, to help it be successful. And, I want somebody who can operate really quickly and efficiently. So that's what I would be looking for in a provider, something, someone that can move things along very efficiently and very quickly and be as transparent with me as possible.
Great, thanks, Carrie. That's some really interesting insights. And, speaking of, being flexible and adaptable, given the ongoing pandemic, Andrew, how do you see how the industry has changed, in the past year in response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, this has been an unprecedented year for sure. I think we're all ready to be done with this year, and we're almost there. I think we're almost days away from an emergency use authorization. So it's been interesting. Although from a pandemic perspective, it's upended our daily lives completely, and Zoom meetings like this are becoming our day. But for the biotech industry specifically, it's been an unprecedented positive year when you look at the growth and the new innovations that the industry has seen, completely outside of the vaccine efforts. If you look at just the market for the biotech segment, I think we've already surpassed a record for a number of IPOs. By the end of October, I think there were 73, and we're probably getting closer to 75, 80 by the end of the year. And the amount of funding that the biotech industry has raised is almost 2 times any previous year. We were over 13.3 billion in new funding for the industry. So despite the rest of the world kind of screeching to a halt with the pandemic, there's been a significant amount of investment and innovation in the biotech space, really just furthering our, the commitment of some of these new technologies and new solutions that we need to get out there. I think there's the silver lining, if you can say, in the pandemic, is that it's really renewed the focus on us as an industry. I think a greater exposure from a public perspective of what's going on within this space to really, our goal is to get breakthrough technologies and life-saving solutions out to patients in a safe and fast way. Interestingly, in contrast, the CRO industry, which is where I've worked for the past 13 years in both small and large CROs, I've never had the luxury of being on Carrie's side, on the sponsor side, but work daily with lots of folks in Carrie's shoes. That's been very different. I think the CROs were hit pretty hard by the pandemic early on. There was a lot of consolidation, and just the lack of an ability to travel is a fundamental aspect of clinical research, and having CRAs on site to source verify all the documents. So there was a lot of consolidation that occurred early on. I think most of the industry has, what I would say, recovered in some sense, but it's actually forced us to finally make some changes, which I hope stick, in how we do business and how clinical trials are run fundamentally. But I think we're going to continue to see a lot of consolidation within the service provider space. Looking back a couple of years, I think there was a study from the Tufts development group that said that the top 10 largest CROs own over 50% of the entire drug development market. So there's a consolidation in that space, which in turn has created an opening, in a sense, and an increased demand for filling some of that niche specialty space, as Carrie was talking about. And there's certainly a demand that we're seeing for not a lot of providers left that are focusing on the smaller side.
Thank you, Andrew. It's definitely been a very unique and interesting year with a big focus on biotechs and, I think drug research in general. So building off of what Andrew said about changes in the industry, Sue, what are some important points and strategies you have found to be successful when working with small biotechs?
Well, I've been in the small biotech, very much the startup biotech for the past 15 years, and it's a very competitive and dynamic arena. They require a high-touch approach, a partnership philosophy for sure. They are very hands-on. This product is their baby. They often don't have a portfolio. And so there's a lot of high stakes in it for them. And they really appreciate being involved, the transparency, talking about their study, being involved, understanding their mechanism of action, the science and the operational logistics of executing their studies, developing some strategies together. So I think in the long run, being sincere and genuine goes a long way with them, and not promising things that you can't deliver, and saying the things that you do will come to fruition. So walking the walk and talking the talk, per se. But I do know that flexibility, speed, and quality, because of the competitive nature of this space, is essential when working with the biotechs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Those are some great points, Sue. And Carrie, back to you. From a sponsor perspective, what are some of the unique needs that you find that are relevant to small biotech that might be different than a large pharma might have?
So I think Sue hit the nail on the head with, where we like, a approach, I kind of refer to us as being a little bit needy, if you will. This is, we don't have large portfolios. We oftentimes have only one drug with maybe sometimes just one study. So it is thing to us. This is the success of the study or studies is really the success of the company, point blank. So, we need to ensure that we're getting the attention that we need, even though we don't have this big portfolio to offer a CRO or a provider, right? We need that transparency. Like, this is a two-way relationship. I don't know how to do it any other way successfully other than to build that partnership. And that means it's a two-way. I have to, what the partner needs from me that they're not getting or be successful on our behalf, in addition to what I need from them. So definitely need, timely decisions. I need them to be super flexible and be able to change when the data is telling us we need to change, or whether the data being that the study's not enrolling, whatever that data is, I need the flexibility and the adaptability, because we just need to be able to pivot very quickly into what the next approach is. I think Sue alluded to this. I don't know that she said the word authentic, but I'm really looking for to Sue's point, genuine and an authentic and experienced partner to be able to work with. I need to rely heavily on the partner and the partnership that we create. So it's really important that we develop a strong and trusting relationship with our providers. And, I've had the luxury of being successful in this space when both parties are flexible and open and really transparent with each other and not afraid to challenge each other and push back on each other. And when we're really clear on our expectations of each other.
Carrie, I couldn't agree with you more. Being a service provider, we're always kind of behind the eight ball, right? And so a partnership truly is a two-way street and requires attention and time invested into making that relationship work. A lot of open communication and dialogue of what's working and what's not working on both sides. So it can be challenging to maintain at times, especially during peak deliverables. And, knowing that the small biotechs don't have all representatives, it is important that the CRO come with a strong cross-functional team. So you could rely on our processes and our expertise for your study. So I believe, just having those expectations, first and foremost, being very clear and concise, and that people really understand what's at stake and what the priorities are, it's important. So I totally agree on the partnership. Partnership means different things to different people, for sure. And just understanding the dynamics of how a good partnership works, it's really give and take. So it's much appreciated when the sponsor comes to the CRO with that mentality.
And Carrie, I assume that cost is a consideration of small biotechs when they're considering a service provider. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I don't like to lead with cost because I want quality, right? I want quality. I want a good partnership, but absolutely, we oftentimes are running under a very tight budget, very small budget, obviously tight timelines. We're not typically, smaller biotechs aren't, commercializations, so we don't have the revenue coming in. The expenses and the costs we take a look at and monitor quite closely. And we're all in drug development, right? So we know how expensive drug development is. So for us, speed is something that is really important, and we have to take a look at the cost. But I don't like that to be my driver, because I also want, garbage in is garbage out, right? And I don't mean any disrespect to anybody, but I need a provider that can be high quality and that can suit the business needs as well. But obviously cost is something that we have to take into consideration, because we just don't have, the revenue coming in typically.
Yep, Yeah, and that totally makes sense. And I think, from a metadata perspective, from a technology side, I think that's why, we try to have a full unified platform to sort of meet all your IT needs. And I think that is I think that helps, small biotechs in a couple ways. I think the first is it really provides the right flexibility. If everything's on one system and you have one vendor, it's easier to sort of push out changes, make those changes, be a bit more nimble and flexible with sort of those studies and not having to, relaunch things and reconfigure things. And I think the second piece is just around the fact that, my assumption is a small biotech, you don't necessarily have the large IT infrastructure you might find with a large pharma company or necessarily their expertise. So if you have the right technology partner, you can really, lean on them to be sort of your internal IT department to sort of make sure that your data is going in the right spot, that it's being well managed, that you have everything you need for your sites to run, as well as everything you need for sort of as you get sort of the end of your trial and that all important FDA submission. So Andrew, back to you. We've discussed many factors that are important for a true and successful partnership between a CRO and a sponsor. How can a CRO be effective in adapting to these unique needs of small biotechs, especially given the current environment?
Yeah, I think, well, with the current environment, really an inability to travel. I mean, at the end of the day, this is still a relationship and very highly personal business. Clinical development is dealing with people, and and we're dealing with patients. At the end of the day, we're all here to try to do something to improve patients' lives. And it's been challenging without an ability to have some of that face time, which really helps teams be effective and true partners, as Sue and Carrie were describing. When you can really just sit down in a room and talk through in an open way, it's simple, but it is the most effective solution to solving any problems or just making sure everyone's expectations and plans are aligned. And that's one of the reasons I was really thrilled to join Catalyst earlier this year. Catalyst is a relatively new name on the full service side, and specifically in the oncology space, where I've played for over 20 years. But the company has been built on a heritage of over 10 years of providing custom, flexible solutions, predominantly through resourcing and functional needs. And Catalyst's recent evolution is to really think very heavily about where the company wanted to be and where the demand was within the market, and just hearing that there was still a significant need from a biotech perspective to be that nimble, flexible organization that still has an infrastructure and a capability to meet the needs of a rapidly moving phase 1, 2, 3 oncology protocol. That's why I think we're really excited as to become this next generation CRO, to marry up with Carrie and others in the industry who are looking to bring those next generation therapies into the clinic, to move them very rapidly to proof of concept. We got to understand what the dosing and if these drugs have a potential benefit, and then if yes, very rapidly getting them through to patients and to market from there. So that's really where I was excited in doubling down on as a company when Catalyst merged with CE3 this summer, and finally getting to work directly with Sue, who I've known for quite a number of years, and we've crossed paths at every single oncology event that you can imagine. That the company made an investment in bringing an entire organization into the fold that has 15 plus years of working exclusively in oncology and with biotechs, and understanding that culture of interacting in a very rapid pace. I like to use the term a sense of urgency, and building that sort of reciprocal partnership. So that's why, I mean, I'm really excited. We're formally launching the Catalyst Oncology brand very soon. This may be the first kind of public announcement teaser of it coming out there, but to really double down on being an oncology specific solution for that biotech space is what we really want to do just incredibly well.
Thanks, Andrew. It's fantastic to hear about the launch of Catalyst Oncology. I think it's great. That's great for the small biotech space. And I guess moving back to Carrie, can you reflect on how this model may fit, biotech specific needs, and within that, can you specifically talk about the technology needs that you may have?
Yeah. So biotechs don't typically have the luxury of having a very robust technology infrastructure. I can speak to that personally in all of the small startup biotechs that I've worked at. the larger biotechs, when they start to become more toward the commercial, of course, they start to, invest more heavily in the technology infrastructure. But prior to that, I mean, in my current company, which is normal, there's multiple systems. They don't typically communicate with each other. We have multiple systems that some do the same thing. So which system do you use is really, or do you use is you whichever one you're comfortable with or familiar with. So, this is one of the other areas where outsourcing makes perfect sense. We utilize our CRO and our service providers, and they bring some of the systems and the solutions that we're lacking in these smaller companies, that typically only a larger pipeline or a larger, more commercial organization has readily available, or quite honestly can afford to have. So, this is a huge part of, when I'm thinking of a service provider, I'm also thinking about the systems that they can bring to the clinical trials that we're partnering with, for sure.
Great. And Andrew, how is Catalyst Oncology, specifically addressing some of the needs that Carrie outlined for small biotechs?
Yeah, this is some of the fun stuff in being a relatively newer organization, and myself being relatively new to the organization and coming in and saying, hey, how about we do it this way? I mean, we're not tied down by some decades old systems or processes that, maybe were homegrown or just have been ingrained in our processes. We've had a really nice opportunity to kind of just think about this fresh, and having so many experts within the organization who have been there in the industry for many years, seen the evolution over time, and said, why don't we do this? Why don't we finally just do this a little bit better? Why are we still doing it this way? Is probably a better way to put it. We've been talking about, risk-based monitoring for decades and adaptive trials for decades. Let's just do it, right? And that's one benefit of this pandemic, is that it's actually encouraging people to get a little outside the comfort zone. And in being a newer organization with a little bit of investment to play with, we kind of had the luxury of assessing some of the newer developments in the industry and really trying to make some investments that are a little disruptive to help streamline our process, all in the in the mindset of remaining flexible, right? We don't want to overdo it and bring too much constraint to the day, because the nature of an early phase oncology study, it just inherently needs flexibility. Even a 3+3 dose escalation design is adaptive by nature. You have to move and shift any given day. So it's really been fun to kind of fold in some newer technologies within our processes and to really look at some cutting edge ideas around genomics, EMR access. I mean, we're thinking about a way. We were challenged by a sponsor. Can you do an oncology study in a completely 0% SDV? I mean, that's a really, right? That's a fundamental way of a shift from our industry, as well as looking at a lot of data visualization and bringing this all together, all with the goal of kind of reducing the burden on the site and ultimately on the patient. I mean, oncology patients, this has been a really tough time. They need care, right? You can't just forego getting your annual physical. You have cancer, you need treatment. And so do you run the risk of going into a center and getting exposed to COVID? Or do you forego some potentially life-saving or life-extending therapies? So I think we've really been pressured to think outside the box this year, which has been phenomenal. And I really hope that a lot of these approaches in allowing patients to have a little less challenge in participating in a clinical trial. I mean, if you can do a blood draw at a local site, or ship an oral therapy for them to take it home as opposed to having to drive a few hours to get their next treatment, these all make sense, right? So let's just go ahead and make those changes and make that part of our standard operating approach, and that's what we're looking to do here. For example, we were thrilled to be the first CRO to implement the Viva Vault safety platform, because we were coming in completely fresh. What do we want to bring to the table as a safety system? There's two out there that have been tried and true for a long time, work very well, but we're hearing a lot of noise about this disruptive technology over here. So let's go take a look at that, and then maybe jump in both feet, as this is our primary offering if sponsors are open to our technology solution that they don't have on their own, like Carrie said. But while remaining flexible, we're not completely wedded to that if someone has a preference otherwise. And similarly, we've made some investments that afford us some systems that a lot of CROs our size don't have. We have a very robust feasibility platform. We're looking, as I said, around partnerships and perhaps acquisitions around a lot of genomics and EMR to EDC type cross-platform interfaces, as well as we've really enjoyed our corporate investment and commitment to working with metadata. And with you, Ted, and the team, we've seen a lot of value and success in bringing a completely integrated CTMS, eTMF, and EDC platform to the table for sponsors like Carrie when they say, hey, we don't have any of this in-house. We have worked with different systems. We may have preferences, but if you guys have an integrated solution that works and makes it simple, then absolutely. And that's one thing we're really proud to be to working with the metadata team and bringing that solution to the table. I mean, Ted, perhaps you want to share more about those solutions.
Yeah, totally. I think, our approach at metadata is sort of to get everything onto a unified platform. So we're probably the only company that has a full set of solutions. And I think that allows for a lot of flexibility and integration, which is really important for small biotechs. It's specific, I think the first thing is really, regardless of what products you choose that are, important for your study or your sponsor, you get access to sort of some really cool, reporting tools and advanced analytics that you may necessarily get with some other vendors. And sort of going back to sort of, the CTMS, eTMF, and EDC on a single platform, which Catalyst Oncology has invested in, allows for a lot of benefits, not only for sponsors but also for CROs as well. It really allows you to get all your stakeholders, operating off of the same data. If all the data is on the same platform, everyone's sharing everything, they see the exact same thing, which creates a lot of really nice efficiencies for sponsors, as well as makes it a lot easier for sites to sort of, deal with the data and deal with the day-to-day, challenges of a clinical trial, especially in this environment.
I know the data component is so important to the biotechs because they live and breathe on what their data is doing, right? So
every day
having quality data is essential.
Yeah.
And just to mirror Carrie's thumbs up, I think our biotechs are trying to push out emerging therapies, right? That next generation therapy that really is impactful to the patients. And so we're all in this together, right? With trying to help our patients. And so it's so important that the CRO models what the sponsor is looking for, and having that next generation CRO that can keep up pace with the evolving therapies and have experience in reporting the safety data and understanding the complex endpoints and really delivering a quality product is key in this whole biotech CRO technology partnership.
Yeah. And Sue, I would add even not just the CRO listening to the sponsor and what the sponsor is looking for, but I'll flip it and say we as the sponsor should be looking to the CROs and the service providers to say, what are you guys seeing? What are you hearing? What do you think? How can we be disruptive? How can we change some of the way that we've been approaching things and operate? The world is changing around us, and not just with COVID. COVID, I think, has highlighted the immediate need for making changes. And to Andrew's point earlier, I'm really hopeful that many of these things continue to stick, where we're making these trials much more patient-centric instead of sponsor-centric or scientifically centric, right? We do things because we think we've had to do them that way. But I think this has forced us to start to take a step back and think about, okay, we need to change immediately because these patients can't get to the sites. The monitors are not allowed on site. What do we need to do differently? And so to me, it's as much as this has been an awful time for many people, and don't get me wrong, I hope I never see this again in my lifetime or my children's lifetime. But I'm trying to find the glass half full portion of this. Right, the silver lining is, maybe it's taught us some things that it's incumbent upon us to carry those forward, so that we're not just falling back into the old ways of doing things, including the SDV, the 100% SDV. Anyway.
Right. I mean, it needs to come down to the patients and the sites at the end of the day. Part of the fact our success as a CRO is with the patients and the sites. And so we can't do this without them, for sure.
I think what's really interesting, sort of an outcome of this pandemic, is accelerating a lot of the technology changes in clinical research that we were already seeing. So you're thinking on the patient side, coming up with ways that we can collect patient data and reach out to patients if they can't go into a clinic. And then on the sponsor site side, it's really about how do we monitor and check sort of the source documents without being able to go onto site. And sort of my hope is, at least from a technology perspective, that we can sort of keep and implement a lot of those changes that made it easier on sites as well as on patients. So any final comments from Carrie, Sue, or Andrew before we wrap up?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. This was great. Being able to speak with all of you and meet with Sue and Andrew and yourself, Ted. So I really appreciated it.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah, look forward to some questions here.
Yeah, and so stick around, everyone, for we'll start the Q&A shortly. Hi, this is Ted Kirby, and thank you for joining our session. So I'm here, I'm going to moderate the Q&A discussion today. And I'm going to kick it off with a question that I think is relevant to the topic. And I think for this one, we can probably start with Carrie and then go to Andrew and Sue. So first one is, what changes have you made to your clinical studies as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that you think you'll employ after the pandemic is over?
So it's a great question. Definitely trying to, I think I alluded to in the pre-recorded session, we're really trying to think about how to make these more patient-centric, not just because of COVID, which is what we've had to do quickly, but I'd like to carry that forward. So one of the things, which is a huge thing that we are doing at my current company, we started to implement that at my former company, is things like home nursing, having the study, and I've been talking about this for years, have the study actually come to the patient instead of the patient having to have the inconvenience of going to the study and the study site. It's not simple. I get it. It's, it's another added cost. However, if they're going to the site less, maybe it's less of the site cost, so it'll balance out. But I think that's one step that I really want to make sure we're considering moving forward, is being able to have more of that home care. Also, I think something that we have to look at, and this has been the bane of my existence for years, is the SDV. And because the monitors haven't been able to go on site, and with the use of electronic medical records now, I think less of the time on site and just doing SDV and really trying to look at the whole picture of the case book, I think is very beneficial. So I think it's forced us to kind of do a little bit more of that. Think about, well, how can we really be overseeing and monitoring this study without having to go to the site and without doing SDV? So those are two things that for me, I'm going to do everything in my power to keep utilizing that moving forward. And Sue and Andrew, I don't know, I'm sure you guys have things to add as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the patient centricity, I'll keep harping on that. I think it's critical that this is actually encourage the industry to start taking it more seriously. In oncology, for as long as I can remember, the data has always quoted that less than 5%, or certainly single-digit percentages of oncology patients participate in clinical trials, and that is the fundamental rate limiter to development. It drives timelines and the need for a very large number of sites on most of our studies, because enrollment is just fundamentally slow. And because some of the study designs are really limiting to the number of patients that even could participate if they wanted to. I mean, we're really being very selective for the types of patients purposefully, but also sometimes trying to shift the balance, towards really healthy cancer patients. So I really like that, like you said, Carrie, home health concepts and direct-to-patient IP for oral therapies have become fairly standard. On the Catalyst side, even just as our basic study design and budgeting process, we're assuming a large portion of visits are now remote, right? And that, we're working with predominantly the same oncology treatment centers over and over, and now most of them have gotten pretty comfortable with allowing for some form of remote access. Not all, it's a wide range, and that's the challenge, is every Every academic center for sure has very different technology platforms in-house, different requirements, and that's I think one area that would really benefit the industry is a little more streamlining across the sites in how some of the technology platforms talk, which we're working on as well. But I think fundamentally, yes, we're assuming going forward there will be remote monitoring. Maybe it's still 100% SDV. In earlier phase oncology, you don't always have the benefit of allowing the study to come to the patient. They still, because we're dealing with unknowns as far as safety profiles and dose levels, that you still need the patient to be there for the unexpected potential toxicities, especially if you're dealing with a lot of these immunotherapies, right? In the early days with checkpoint inhibitors and then CAR T, we saw unexpected significant reactions that we weren't ready for, and actually caused some significant toxicities and deaths in some of the early treatments. So I think that that's a challenge, is that there's still some fundamental limitations to the nature of oncology, that the patients still need to go to the primary care, to their oncologist in the treatment center. But there are pieces of a protocol that when you unpack it, and we've talked a lot internally about decentralized trials, that you don't need every visit to be at the site, and you don't need for the patient, and you don't need every visit to be on site for the monitor. And certainly, do you need to collect all that data, is some of the conversations we're having with sponsors. Do you need those extra PK time points that requires a patient to come back the next day or to stay all day? Let's just make it a little bit simpler so that when someone is presented with this 60-page informed consent, they're not freaked out and decline. Just bring that back to the patient, and try to make it a little bit easier to participate and more beneficial on their side.
Great. So we had building off that question, we had another question just generally around how have you accounted for or managed the additional cost of the changes you've had to make to your to these studies based on the pandemic, if there have been any cost changes?
So I think, one of the, certainly it's costing more money, right now, at least initially, because it's an added cost to add, for the example I used about the home health. We didn't anticipate that back in, January, right? So we started to implement that in April, May, June, and currently. We haven't gone down the path of, and this will be, I'm sure, a very difficult conversation with clinical sites. I think a large part of their revenue is, they conduct trials, and this, brings in some of their money. That's why they're doing the research. You can't expect to do this for free, and none of us do. But, for the less that they're doing at the sites, I as a sponsor would want to pay less at the site then and put that money more into the home care. So those conversations, are just starting, because right now we're just paying extra. But I think we'll have to start to have those discussions, and it's a sensitive one.
Yep. Another question we had, again, around COVID-19 is sort of how are you accounting for in your clinical studies any symptoms for COVID-19 that may pop up in your patient population?
So for us, the good and bad news about COVID, although it's not 100%, but there's some pretty specific symptoms, right? The loss of taste, loss of smell, the febrile type things. Certainly, if patients exhibit that, our recommendation would be for the investigator to, consider testing that patient. We are not going out of the gate and saying, hey, you should test all of your patients. We're really leaving it up to the clinical sites as to what their standard of care is in this new norm. Some of the sites test every patient that comes in, some don't. And that's really incumbent upon them. We didn't want to take that on to sort of start to mandate that. We at my company are not doing COVID tests, so it's a little bit of a tricky, a slippery slope for us. I did start to ask the question of our team, though, when the vaccine is available, would we enable our patients to get vaccinated? So I would encourage everybody out there to think about that. Can your drug, you have to understand what the makeup of the vaccines are. Can your drug, is it contraindicated with anything, or can you have your patients get the COVID vaccine? And I think you should be asking that question because it will be coming, thankfully, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So we do have to start thinking about that for sure. But we aren't necessarily going out of the gate and testing it. Now, if the site comes back and says we'd really like to test, we will pay for the test. But that's something that we've done. So again, it's another additional cost, you know, that for us, we're in rare disease right now. And so for us, it's you know, we don't want to lose the patients that might have potential benefit, hopefully, from our drugs. So we want to be able to, you know, assist the sites in any way and the patients.
At least echo what you're saying, Carrie, at least on the protocol design front, early in the pandemic, March, April, people were asking, should we start writing in COVID testing guidelines into the protocol? And I think generally, same as you saw, the answer was no, the sites are handling it, right? This is part of their care and their approach. So it's not being prescriptively written into oncology protocols, but yes, certainly an awareness. And I think collecting that information, if the sites are asking those questions, is just part of the data that people are interested to measure, or at least be aware of. I don't know if you've seen difference, Sue, or some of the side effects, or, you know, of COVID. That's the risk with cancer patients, is certainly some of the late stage diseases. They can't forgo care, and there is a risk in going to get care.
Right. I've only seen one protocol that required COVID testing before drug administration. So I really think it's dependent on the mechanism of action and how much you're either suppressing or engaging your immune system, whether or not you want to give their study drug, right? So a lot is left to the sites. I've only seen it once mandatory pre-testing, and it had to be within a certain window, 1 week window of receiving study drugs. So it was definitely an implication of the logistics of, was there rapid tests available at the site, and a little bit more complexity added to an already complex study. So I think one of the good silver linings of COVID, to kind of circle back on one of the previous questions, was, and it's a kind of a generic response, but we're such a regulated and routine industry that people always wanted to try things, and this has forced us to be creative. And the interesting part is both sites, CRO, and sponsors had to jointly be creative together to achieve a common goal. And so we realized that was beneficial across many aspects, from just how we screen subjects to enrolling and having them come in and monitoring, and how we train sites and things like that. So I feel like it was the nudge that industry needed. And we've all come to the table with a lot of creative ideas of how to make this a little bit more streamlined and succinct. So it's good. And I agree, we should continue to carry on some of these things, regardless of COVID and vaccines, of how to keep things a little bit more simple and not get so regulated and tied up in our old processes that we're afraid to not try new things.
Yeah, definitely understood that. We had another question actually for Andrew, but I think Sue or Carrie, you could also answer this as well. Is what sort of remote monitoring or wearable devices are you considering, if any, just sort of to expand clinical research to more participants in oncology?
This is an area that of interest to me personally. I think the challenge we've seen in oncology is that it's, at the end of the day, a lot of the protocols, you're looking at, look at the solid tumor side, your endpoints around efficacy are based on measurements from a scan, right? And there isn't an ability to do that outside of a CT, MRI scan, right? So the primary endpoints of an oncology study can't change until we get to some really cool technology that allows you to do that in a wearable or home-based way. Now, there's a lot of data and a lot of evidence around, circulating tumor cells and other measures, but those still haven't quite gained the uptake around an approvable measure. So I think the challenge is there's a lot of interest in wearables and other devices that can help oncology patients, but in a clinical trial setting, those are only collecting some basic data, and they're not collecting the data that are fundamental to whether or not your drug is safe or working. If we could do blood draws in a simpler way, or look at some other blood-based measures, perhaps on the hematologic malignancy side, I think that'd be a nice step forward. But I think today the wearable piece applies very well to other therapy, certain other therapeutic areas, but in oncology, that it's really a challenge that the patients still need to be coming into the site to get some of the the primary measures.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll add there, Andrew, because I spent about 20 years of my career thus far in oncology as well, is there's still things, the patients typically still want to see their oncologists or their radiologists, right? So there is some of that. But if we can make the studies easier, if we can do things like, have some of the, we all have phones, can they're taking the medication, they're filling out their questionnaires, any of that stuff be super easy for them to use instead of giving a different device that we think is more secure or better validated than their phone. I think that would go a long way. And doing some of the home visits for some of the things like blood draws. We were looking into, we had to do some ophthalmology exams in one of our oncology studies. And is it super easy to have a mobile, ophthalmology, visit? No. Is it expensive? Yes. But could we start to think about that? Can we do that so that the patient can maybe walk outside their home, and instead of it taking them an hour to drive or more, driving in traffic, getting to the site, parking, maybe it'll take 15 minutes instead of, 4.5 hours. So these are the kinds of things that I think, to Sue and to your point, we've started to, I think, expand our thinking a little bit more because we've been forced to, and now shame on us if we're not trying to think ahead and do this more as our norm moving forward.
Yep, and I would agree with that. We had, building off that question, we have a few questions actually. If you considered sort of integrating telemedicine into any of your upcoming studies, sort of just your general thoughts on that for oncology studies.
Yes, I know we've implemented that point blank, and again, we were forced to, the sites were like, no, we aren't having our patients come in, or some of the sites turned into fully COVID, even the oncology areas, they were pulled into COVID studies. I think things have calmed down a little bit now that, people in centers have, learned a little bit more about how to manage it. But absolutely, we've started to implement telemedicine because, again, we were forced to, and now, if there's things that they can do, checking in via telemedicine instead of having the patient to go in, then we're okay with that. There's certain things, of course, if there's part of your primary or secondary endpoints that require measurements or specific things, you can't ignore that. But those, check-ins, you can certainly try and do more from a remote perspective.
Great. I think we had another question just generally around if you're using integrating any sort of real world data into sort of your clinical studies just for like a go, no-go decision, or using real world data in sort of any capacity to inform your studies.
I would like to say yes, of course. Anytime we learn or we read up on things or we review our own data, that we have the ability to sort of monitor that and sort of shift when needed, when the data sort of points you in that direction. So yes, I would think, all right, we're using real world data. My current company is a small company, so we're not doing, worldwide evidence studies. But, we're doing as much as we can with, collecting data on our ongoing studies, reading, searching, enlisting our vendors and partners to kind of ask them what they're seeing in terms of any of their evidence to sort of help steer the direction.
Yeah, I've certainly seen an interest in real world evidence being used instead of historical comparators, historical controls, right? I think that's kind of the mid phase of development when you're looking at single arm studies. I think it's still very early for oncology, and there's plenty of precedent in the past number of years around single-arm studies leading directly to approval, right? You look at all the immuno-oncology therapies because there's such a need, and if you can demonstrate a strong response, you don't need to have a randomized controlled trial anymore. But I think there is increasing uptake of using real-world evidence to show or to get a better feel or comfort that your drug may be working in comparison with some historical controls. But I still think in oncology, it's a tough therapeutic area, right? I think you still have to show, and especially earlier phase, you have to show safety and dosing, and the evidence piece doesn't really benefit you a whole lot other than just getting a little more comfort in what you're seeing as your signals. And then, the later stage, you either see a breakthrough designation right out of the gate. That's what everybody's going for, and you just go straight to the FDA with single arm trials, or you go for the tried and true randomized until there is more uptake by the regulatory agencies around using sort of synthetic comparators is a term I've seen. I think oncology as a therapeutic area will be slower than other therapeutic areas to uptake some of the newer real-world evidence approaches that some of the big data affords you.
Great. We had a question around imaging, which I think I should take a stab at. This question was specifically if patients can go to CVS or Walgreens to get images taken, and from a technology perspective, from metadata, I don't know if that's we're quite there yet. But we are sort of looking at sort of ways we can actually use AI and algorithms to actually better identify sort of the lesions and help radiologists who have to review that data. It's something that we're in process of developing to help them sort of better identify those. But it's not we haven't sort of seen any sort of images starting to take place sort of in like CVS health clinics or anything like that.
If a CVS had a CT scanner, that'd be fabulous.
Yeah,
but
it would be amazing.
I think that's the challenge, is the cost and the functionality of a lot of the scans you need for oncology patients. At least solid tumors, you have to get. I think an allowance for someone to drive to a local imaging facility that has those capabilities that may be 30 minutes away versus a 2 to 4 hour drive to your academic center. That's a nice benefit that this pandemic has driven. I think we're figuring out how to do that, how to allow data to come from sources that are not the primary care or the oncology team, but and integrating that data on the technology side. I think, as you're saying, Ted, there's a lot more flexibility that the systems have allowed us to pull that all in now. But yeah, boy, I'd love to get to a point where you could just go to CVS or Walgreens and get your cycle 2 scan and not have to trek all the way to wherever your oncologist is.
Yeah, that would be the dream. And Carrie, this question is for you. I think as we're sort of getting to the end of the Q&A, wanted to know, what are some key things a small biotech should look for in a service and a technology partner?
So I think, for some of the things that are really important to us is that that cross-functional expertise that oftentimes a small biotech doesn't have yet, or we might be utilizing a consultant here and there for something. So if I can get that in the service provider, that's also going to help me manage the study. That's a win for me. Definitely, looking for somebody that, again, small company, we don't have like a global footprint. So for me, when I'm doing a global study, I need a provider that's going to help with a global, have some more global expertise and experience, because we'll need them to do like our regulatory submissions, right? Our clinical trial applications, et cetera. So I think, it's a lot of it is looking for that partnership to be able to supplement what we are lacking as an organization with being so small, sort of having that additional expertise that we may not have. Great.
No, fantastic. And I think this will be our last question, and this is for Sue and Andrew. I guess from your perspective, from Catalyst, what are some of the challenges that you see small oncology biotechs facing, and sort of what are some of the things that Catalyst is doing to address those?
Sue, you go first.
Well, I know cost is a factor for some of the smaller companies. So being creative and, potentially, do you need all the bells and whistles up front when you don't even know if you have proof of concept out of the gate? So, cost is definitely a factor. Speed, quality, and flexibility are, back to what we said earlier in the taped session. They need to be able to make data-driven decisions and rely on the data that they're making the decisions from. And so hence the quality. And I think in general, if I could say, is I think the responsiveness, the following up and following through with them so they have trust and security that you are working with them and keeping things on track is extremely important for them. And Carrie could probably, she wants to
Absolutely.
know who, she wants to trust that you are acting upon her company's best interest and that somebody will pick up the phone when she's calling and things like that. And so the following up, following through, and responsiveness, I think, are key.
Yeah, Sue, I love
Great.
how we, I don't think our finance team likes it, but we standardly say, I don't know that you need this.
Yeah.
Here's a recommendation, and let's talk through it. We really want to be a trusted advisor and not just thought of as a doer. Now, obviously, CROs are and technology companies, at the end of the day, we're contracted to do the work that we're scoped to do. But if we can be seen as that partner, like you guys have been talking about the whole time, and even make recommendations and feel comfortable, that's the best sort of partnerships that I've had, is where, it's okay to push back. It's okay to say, you know what, we're not okay with that, with you making that decision, right? And maybe here's an alternative. As long as it's a two-way street, that you can have that conversation. And even then, to show alternatives, sit down and do some modeling, show some cost differentials, et cetera. You gain trust, even if at the end of the day, you may still have to do what you're told. That's the fun of being a CRO. To be part of that, to have a seat at that table is really a benefit.
Yeah, and I think it's a must, Andrew, in my opinion. And I've talked with Sue in the past, and you guys, from my perspective, my boss says that I say this, I don't know how to do it successfully any other way, right? Like, so for me, I need the service provider, the CRO, to challenge me and push back on me. I may have a fair amount of experience, right? I've got like 20 plus years of experience. I don't have every answer to every question. You guys may have experienced something recently that I haven't. I want to hear that. I want to hear how you guys, challenged it, how you got another company to think differently. That excites me. That's showing me that you care, with me caring about the study as well. So that's not, for me, that's how we should be operating. It shouldn't be, I tell you what to do and you don't ask any questions. That's just not healthy for me. I don't, and then I'm mad that if the CRO doesn't deliver when I've dictated what they're going to do, even though they may not have agreed with it or may had challenges. So I think we have to get better at that. We're making progress. We are. It's taken a long time, but I think we as sponsors, and I'll put it on the sponsors because that's where I'm, speaking on behalf of, I think we have to do a better job of that. I think we have to be more comfortable asking those questions of our CROs and our providers. What do you need from me that can help you be successful? Here's what we need from you. Here's kind of, how I want us to approach it. Will that work for you? If not, what do you need from me? What do you need from the company? Yes, at the end of the day, the sponsor has to have the ultimate decision because we're held accountable. But there's a whole lot in between that, right? And we should be listening. We should be very open to the input that our providers are experts in and can give to us.
Great. So I think we're just about at time. So thank you, Carrie, Andrew, and Sue. This has been a lightning discussion. I definitely learned a lot. So I'm going to turn it now back over to Patty at CAA.
Okay, thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your thoughts and expertise. This was a great discussion. And I would also like to thank all of our attendees for joining us for today's webinar. We hope you enjoyed this online educational experience. Please be sure to visit the DIA website for a complete listing of all educational offerings, as well as to register for upcoming webinars. DIA is committed to developing quality education programs that meet the needs of its members, and your feedback is greatly appreciated. Please take the time to evaluate this webinar by completing the online survey. Thank you once again to our presenters and to all of you. Enjoy your day.